The twins of the millionaire didn't sleep with anyone until the poor nanny did something that shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The heavy wrought iron gate of the Johnson mansion creaked as Sarah Johnson stepped off the inner-city bus at the stop in front of the Beverly Hills condominium in Los Angeles. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the handle of her worn synthetic leather suitcase, the same one that had accompanied her mother during years of domestic work in the upper-middle-class homes of San Jose. The March sun beat down hard on the asphalt, creating waves of heat that distorted the view of the imposing property before her. The Johnson mansion rose majestically behind tall, ivy-covered walls, with its adapted colonial architecture blending the charm of old Californian estates with contemporary luxury. 3 floors of exposed stone and fine wood stood out against the blue Californian sky, while windows with white shutters framed flower-filled balconies that looked like scenes from a home decor magazine. The front garden showcased perfectly aligned palm trees and a marble fountain that softly bubbled, creating an atmosphere of sophistication that intimidated any visitor. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted the simple white blouse she had worn 3 times the day before, and checked the documents in her handbag once more. At 24, she bore the weight of being the sole breadwinner for her family since her father passed away in a work accident in construction 5 years prior. Her mother, Mrs. Johnson, was hospitalized at the regional hospital with pneumonia that had worsened, and the expensive medications consumed almost all the savings they had managed to gather. "You can do it, daughter," she murmured to herself, repeating the words of encouragement her mother always said before her job interviews. "You studied, graduated with honors in education. These children need you." The golden intercom glinted in the sun as she pressed the button. A cold, formal female voice echoed through the speaker. "Sarah Johnson?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm here for the nanny interview. Follow the stone path to the main entrance. Mr. Edward is waiting for you in the study." The gate opened automatically, revealing a cobblestone pathway that wound through meticulously maintained gardens. Sarah walked slowly, observing the details that revealed the family's purchasing power. Bronze sculptures scattered across the lawn, a gazebo with hand-woven wicker furniture, and in the background, an infinity pool that blended with the horizon of the sea. The main door was a work of art in carved hardwood, with details reminiscent of Californian traditions. Before she could ring the bell, the door swung open, revealing a middle-aged woman dressed in an impeccable housekeeper uniform. "I'm Victoria, the housekeeper. Mr. Edward is in the study, second door on the right in the main hallway." The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the exterior. The entrance hall had a double-height ceiling, with a Carrara marble staircase elegantly curving up to the second floor. Check crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, while paintings by renowned Brazilian artists adorned the walls covered in imported floral-patterned wallpaper. Sarah made her way down the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the oriental rug that covered the polished wooden floor. She reached the study and gently knocked on the ajar door. "Come in," said a deep male voice. Edward Johnson stood before a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf filled with leather-bound books. At 42, he had the upright posture of someone used to commanding, with gray at his temples giving him a distinguished air and blue eyes that contrasted with his sun-kissed skin. He wore a navy blue dress shirt and tailored pants, even though it was a Saturday morning at home. "Mr. Johnson," Sarah greeted, extending her hand firmly. "I'm Sarah Johnson. Thank you very much for the opportunity for this interview." Edward observed her for a few seconds before shaking her hand. There was something in his eyes, a mix of exhaustion and desperate hope that she recognized immediately. It was the same look she had seen in exhausted parents during her internships at the university daycare. "Please, have a seat." He indicated a leather armchair near the window that overlooked the backyard garden. "You are the 23rd candidate in 6 months. I need to be direct with you. My children are special, not in an educational sense, but emotionally. They are 4 years old, and since losing their mother 2 years ago, they have become extremely reserved." Sarah settled into the armchair, maintaining an upright posture despite her nerves. "Can you tell me more about them? What is the main difficulty the other nannies have faced?" "Jack and James are twins," Edward sighed, walking to the window. "They don't allow strangers to get close, scream when someone tries to touch them, and spend most of their time hiding in their room, hugging each other. The last 3 nannies didn't last even a week. One even said they were impossible to handle. Traumatized children often react this way as a form of protection, Sarah replied gently. During my studies, I interned at a nonprofit that cared for at-risk children. I learned that patience and consistency are crucial. They need to feel safe before they can trust. Edward turned to her, and for the first time since the beginning of the conversation, his eyes showed a glimmer of genuine interest. Do you have experience with families like ours? Sarah hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Edward, I will be honest. This would be my first experience as a nanny in a high-profile family. But I have something I consider more valuable than experience. I have a real need for this job and determination to make it work. My mother is hospitalized, and I need to work to cover her treatment. That means I won't give up at the first difficulty. The businessman studied her face for long seconds. There was a brutal sincerity in his words that touched him unexpectedly. The boys are in their room now. How about meeting them? Edward led Sarah down the hallway on the second floor, where the walls were adorned with old family photographs. She discreetly observed the portraits, mustached men in impeccable suits next to elegant women in vintage dresses, all displaying the same serious and proud expression that seemed to be the hallmark of the lineage. However, her attention was captured by a more recent photograph, a blonde woman with green eyes holding 2 babies, with a radiant smile that contrasted with the coldness of the other portraits. That was Christine, my ex-wife, Edward said, noticing her gaze. The boy's mother. She passed away when they turned 2. Sarah noticed the hesitation in his voice, as if there was much more history behind those simple words. They stopped in front of a light blue wooden door, decorated with hastily applied stickers of trucks and airplanes. Jack, James, Edward knocked gently on the door. We have a visitor. This is Sarah. Absolute silence. Sarah strained her ears and could detect a muffled whisper from the other side of the door, followed by the sound of small feet running. They've hidden, Edward murmured, running his hand through his hair in a clear display of frustration. It's always like this. I'll open the door, but don't force the approach. The last nanny tried to pick one of them up on the first day, and he screamed as if he was being attacked, Sarah completed. It's a common reaction in children with abandonment or loss trauma. Edward looked at her in surprise. How do you? I studied child development with a focus on emotional trauma. I chose this specialization because my younger brother went through something similar when our father died. The door creaked open. The room was spacious and well lit, with 2 twin beds separated by a nightstand. But it was obvious that only one was used. The other remained perfectly made. Expensive toys were scattered across the floor, remote-controlled trucks, imported building blocks, a dollhouse that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. However, what caught her attention the most was the improvised fort in the corner of the room, made with chairs and blankets, from where muffled sounds of frightened breathing came. Jack, James, come say hello to Sarah, Edward said in a firm but patient voice. Sarah knelt on the floor, lowering herself to the height of the hidden children. Her experience at the nonprofit had taught her that body language was crucial to convey safety. Hi, boys, she said softly, without approaching the fort. You built a really cool fort. When I was little, I also liked to make houses with blankets and pillows. It was my secret place where I kept my treasures. A pair of curious eyes appeared through a gap between the blankets. Jack, or maybe James, she still couldn't tell them apart, watched intently but did not leave the hiding spot. What kind of treasures? Came a whispered voice. Edward raised his eyebrows, surprised. It was the first time in months that one of the boys spoke to a stranger spontaneously. Colorful stones I found at the beach, seashells, drawings I made. Sarah continued, keeping her voice low and calm. And you? Do you keep treasures in your fort? Another pair of eyes appeared. The twins were identical. Light brown hair, blue eyes like their father's, but with an expression of caution that shouldn't exist on such young faces. They surprisingly resembled the woman in the photograph in the hallway. We have a truck, said the first boy, still hidden. And a picture of Mommy. The truck is red, added the second, in an even quieter whisper than his brother's. Sarah felt her chest tighten. 4-year-olds hiding photographs of their mother as treasures in improvised forts was a clear sign of unprocessed grief. Red trucks are the best, she agreed. My brother had one just like it. He said it was a fire truck that saved everyone. Ours saves too, said Jack, or James, gaining a bit more confidence. Jack, you can come out now, son, Edward interjected, but Sarah made a discreet gesture for him to wait. You don't have to come out if you don't want to, she said to the boys. Sometimes it's nice to stay in our special corner. But if you want to show me the truck, I would love to see it. I promise I won't touch anything without asking permission. The two boys whispered to each other for a few seconds. Finally, Jack slowly emerged from the fort, holding a red metal fire truck with golden details. He had slightly shorter hair than his brother and a small scar on his chin. This is Jack, Edward clarified. And the one still hiding is James. Jack took a few steps closer but kept a safe distance from Sarah. His eyes were extraordinarily expressive, a mix of curiosity and fear that reminded her of abandoned puppy dogs. It's very nice, Sarah sincerely praised. Does it have a ladder that goes up and down? Jack nodded and demonstrated the mechanism, but without stepping closer. James continued to observe from the fort, only half of his face visible. Do you play firefighters together? She asked. We save the stuffed animals, Jack explained, his voice gaining a more animated tone. When there's a fire in the doll's room. What important work, Sarah said seriously. Firefighters are real heroes. It was then that James finally emerged from the fort, carrying a cloth doll dressed in blue. He was slightly smaller than Jack and had a more introspective demeanor, observing every movement of Sarah with scientific attention. This is Daisy, James said, hugging the doll to his chest. She doesn't. She likes strange people too. Can I say hi to Daisy? Sarah asked respectfully. James hesitated, then extended the doll just enough for Sarah to see it better. Hi, Daisy. You're very pretty. James takes good care of you, doesn't he? The boy nodded vigorously, and for the first time since Sarah entered the room, she saw a hint of a smile on his face. Edward watched the scene with an expression that mixed relief and apprehension. In 15 minutes, Sarah had managed more interaction with the children than any of the other candidates had in weeks of attempts. Sarah, he said softly, can I talk to you outside for a moment? In the hallway, with the door ajar to keep an eye on the boys, Edward leaned against the wall, visibly emotional. They talk to you. I can't remember the last time I saw them interacting like that with someone new. They just need to feel like they have control of the situation, Sarah explained. Children who have gone through traumatic losses develop protective mechanisms. Forcing closeness only increases their anxiety. Edward nodded slowly. When can you start? Sarah felt her heart race. Are you offering me the job? Do you want to work here? More than anything in the world, she replied with complete sincerity. But you need to know that I will give everything I have for these boys. They deserve to feel safe and loved. Then welcome to the Johnson family, Sarah Johnson. Mrs. Johnson watched the scene from the top of the main staircase, hidden behind the marble column that supported the crystal chandeliers. At 72, the matriarch of the family maintained the proud posture of someone who had commanded an empire for decades, but her brown eyes sparkled with a calculating coldness that made anyone feel uncomfortable. She wore an impeccably tailored beige linen suit and discreet but expensive jewelry, a pearl necklace that had belonged to her own mother-in-law and diamond earrings that Edward had given her for last Mother's Day. Victoria, she called the housekeeper in a low but authoritative voice, come here immediately. The woman appeared silently, as she always did. Victoria had worked for the family for 15 years and knew every mood and every secret of the house. She knew exactly when to speak and when to just listen. Did you see the new nanny? Mrs. Johnson asked, not taking her eyes off the children's room door. Yes, Mrs. Johnson. She seems like a well-mannered young woman. Well-mannered, the matriarch repeated with disdain. Victoria, you have worked in this house long enough to know that well-mannered does not mean trustworthy. I want you to keep your eyes wide open. Observe everything she does, who she talks to, what questions she asks. Do you suspect anything specific? Mrs. Johnson descended a few steps, approaching the housekeeper. I suspect everyone who gets close to my grandchildren, especially when my son is vulnerable like he is now. That girl looks like she desperately needs money, and desperate people are capable of anything. In truth, there was something else troubling the matriarch, something she couldn't quite name. When she had first observed Sarah, a strange sensation had overtaken her, as if she already knew that face, those gestures, that way of speaking. It was a vague but persistent memory that left her unsettled. I want you to install a camera in the children's room, she instructed coldly. Discreet, but effective. And I also want the number of the private investigator we use to investigate the company's competitors. I'm going to order a complete investigation into this young woman's background. Victoria hesitated for a moment. Mrs. Johnson, with all due respect, isn't this an overreaction? Mr. Johnson seemed quite confident in his decision. Victoria, the matriarch said with a cutting voice, my son has been emotionally shaken since Christine left. He is not in a position to make sound decisions about who to let near the boys. We've had enough problems with nannies in the past. The housekeeper knew exactly what Mrs. Johnson was referring to. 6 months earlier, they had hired a seemingly trustworthy woman who turned out to be only interested in stealing valuables from the house. Before her, there was another who tried to sell information about the family to local tabloids. And before that, one who simply disappeared in the middle of the night, taking money that had been kept in the kitchen drawer. I will take care of everything, Mrs. Johnson. And one more thing, the matriarch added, adjusting her pearl necklace. I want you to find out everything about Sarah Johnson's family. Where she comes from, where she studied, why she needs a job so urgently. I have a feeling there's much more to this story than she is telling. Meanwhile, in the children's room, Sarah was sitting on the floor, watching Jack and James organize their toys in a routine they clearly followed every day. Jack lined up the cars by size and color, while James arranged the history books in a perfect stack. It was obsessive behavior indicating a need for control amidst emotional chaos. Do you always organize like this? She asked casually. Every day, Jack replied without looking up from the cars. Otherwise, the lady from the hospital gets mad. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What lady from the hospital, Jack? James stopped organizing the books and looked at his brother with a warning expression. It was obvious they had been instructed not to talk about this. We can't tell, James whispered. It's a secret. Edward appeared in the doorway at that moment, holding a printed work contract. Sarah, if you could sign these documents. Victoria will show you your room and explain the house routine. Dad? Jack called. Sarah asked about the lady from the hospital. Edward's face tightened in a tense expression that did not go unnoticed by Sarah. He knelt beside his children and said in a firm but gentle voice, Boys, you don't need to talk about that right now, okay? Sarah is here to take care of. You guys, to play and have fun. But what if she leaves like the others? Paul asked with the brutal honesty of children. Edward looked at Sarah over the boys' heads. Sarah isn't going anywhere. She promised to take care of you. I really promise, Sarah confirmed, extending her pinky to each of the twins. A pinky promise is sacred. Jack and James intertwined their pinkies with hers, but Sarah noticed that their little hands trembled slightly. An hour later, Victoria led Sarah to a room on the 3rd floor, a simple yet comfortable space with a twin bed, a light wood wardrobe, and a desk by the window that overlooked the backyard garden. It was a stark contrast to the luxury of the rest of the house, clearly designated for staff. Meals are served in the kitchen at 7, noon, and 7 in the evening, Victoria explained mechanically. The boys have breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, and dinner at 6. Bath time is at 5 in the afternoon, and they go to bed at 8 sharp. Do they have any specific activities during the day? School, psychologist, any treatment? Victoria hesitated before answering. They've seen several doctors. Mrs. Johnson isn't very fond of outside professionals messing with the children's heads. Sarah frowned. But they've gone through significant trauma. It would be natural for them to have psychological support. That's something you'd have to discuss with Mr. Johnson, Victoria replied evasively. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare dinner. Alone in the room, Sarah unpacked her few clothes and organized the pedagogy books on the desk. As she put the last shirt in the drawer, she found a small notebook left behind by the previous staff member, some pages with hurried notes in a shaky handwriting. Jack doesn't sleep without James in the same bed. James has nightmares about ambulance sirens. They both scream when they see women in white coats. Mrs. Johnson doesn't allow them to talk about before. Edward drinks alone in the study after 10 at night. Sarah quickly closed the notebook and tucked it away in the bottom drawer of the desk. It was valuable information, but also concerning. It was clear that there were layers of trauma and secrets within that family that went far beyond a common marital separation. That night, during dinner in the staff kitchen, she tried to extract more information from Victoria, but the woman remained evasive. It was only when she was heading up to her room that she heard raised voices coming from the study. Edward and Mrs. Johnson arguing in low but tense tones. You can't just hire anyone off the street to take care of the boys. She managed to do in one afternoon what the others couldn't in weeks. You're being naive, Edward. After everything that happened. Sarah hurried upstairs, but the words echoed in her mind. There was definitely more going on in that house than she had imagined, and the twins were at the center of something much more complex than simple family grief. Sarah's first month in the Johnson house passed like a delicate dance of closeness and discoveries. Every morning, she woke up at 6 to watch the garden from her window, mentally planning the day's activities while listening to the sounds of the mansion waking up, the distant hum of the pool motor, the hurried footsteps of Victoria preparing breakfast, and occasionally, the muffled sounds of nightmares coming from the twins' room. Jack and James had established their own routine that included Sarah, but always keeping a safe distance. They allowed her to sit on the floor of the room during playtime, accepted that she read stories sitting in the chair next to the bed, but still flinched if she made any sudden movements or attempted any physical contact. It was a rainy April morning when the first truly unsettling discovery happened. Sarah had suggested a colorful Play-Doh activity at the table on the covered porch, hoping that the hands-on work would help the boys express themselves. Jack was focused on making a miniature fire truck, while James was modeling small figures he called family. Look, Sarah, James said, holding up a small, irregular figure. This is Mommy. It's very pretty, Sarah sincerely praised. And this other one? This is the nurse, James replied, making a figure in a white coat. His voice changed tone, becoming lower and tenser. She hurt Mommy. Jack immediately stopped modeling and looked at his brother with wide eyes. James, you can't say that. Grandma Johnson said it's a secret. Sarah felt her heart race, but kept her voice calm and interested. James, can you tell me how the nurse hurt Mommy? The boy hesitated, looking nervously toward the house. She put medicine in Mommy. Medicine that made Mommy sleep a lot. And when Mommy woke up, she cried a lot. Mommy cried and said she didn't want any more medicine. Jack added in a whisper, as if revealing the world's greatest secret. But the nurse said she had to take it or she would get sicker. Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. Did you see this? We hid in the hospital a few times, James explained, creating more figures from the dough. Dad said Mommy was sick, but she didn't seem sick. She just cried. And then Mommy left, Jack concluded sadly. Grandma Johnson said she didn't want to be our Mommy anymore. At that moment, a shadow passed through the porch door. Mrs. Johnson was standing in the doorway, watching the scene with an expression that mixed contained fury and something that looked a lot like fear. Boys, she said in a sweet but firm voice. How about you go play in your room? I need to talk to Sarah about some things. Jack and James quickly gathered their Play-Doh, avoiding eye contact with their grandma. It was obvious they knew they had broken some unspoken rule of the house. As the children left, Mrs. Johnson approached the table where Sarah was still sitting. At 72 years old, the matriarch maintained an intimidating presence, perfectly styled gray hair, impeccable clothing, and a posture that revealed decades of command. Sarah, she began, pulling out a chair and sitting across from the young woman. I need to make a few things very clear about how this house operates. Of course, Mrs. Johnson. I'm here to learn. First rule, my grandchildren have gone through very specific traumas related to their mother's departure. They tend to fantasize about what happened, mixing reality with childhood imagination. Sarah chose her words carefully. I understand they have gone through a difficult loss, but children are often very accurate when describing experiences that have emotionally marked them. Mrs. Johnson's eyes narrowed. Second rule, I don't want you to encourage conversations about the past. The boys need to focus on the present, on moving forward. Dwelling on what happened will only harm them further. With all due respect, Mrs. Johnson, processing trauma is essential for healthy emotional development. Ignoring what happened can lead to bigger problems in the future. The matriarch leaned forward, her voice dropping to an almost threatening tone. Sarah, you are too young and inexperienced to understand the complexities of this family. Christine, the boy's mother, had issues. Serious problems that required hospitalization and medical treatment. She chose to abandon her children instead of fighting for recovery. What kind of issues? That's none of your concern, Mrs. Johnson cut in sharply. Your role here is to care for the boy's present well-being, not to investigate the family's past. Sarah felt a rebellion rising in her chest, but knew she needed to stay calm if she wanted to continue helping Jack and James. I understand, Mrs. Johnson, but if they bring up the subject spontaneously, you change the subject immediately. Offer a distraction, a new game, anything. And always inform me when that happens. That afternoon, after the boys had napped, Sarah went down to the kitchen looking for Victoria. The housekeeper was preparing a carrot cake, apparently, the only dessert Jack and James would accept. Victoria, can I ask you a personal question? The woman stopped mixing the batter and looked around nervously. Depends on the question. Did you know Christine? The boy's mother. Victoria sighed deeply and lowered her voice. I did. She was a sweet girl, very affectionate with the children. But what? She started to act strangely after the twins turned 2. She became very anxious, cried over anything, sometimes spent days without leaving her room. Late postpartum depression? Could be. Mrs. Johnson insisted she needed medical help. They took her to a private hospital here in Los Angeles. She was hospitalized for 3 months. Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. And after the hospitalization, she came back different, quieter, as if she was always afraid of something. The boys found it very strange. They were very attached to their mother before, but afterward, she could hardly look at them without starting to cry. And then she left. Victoria hesitated before answering. One morning, she just wasn't here anymore. Mrs. Johnson said she had decided she couldn't be a mother. She left a letter for Mr. Johnson and walked away. Did you see that letter? No, but Mr. Johnson was devastated. He really loved Christine. That night, Sarah lay down with her mind buzzing with doubts. The children's words echoed in her ears. The nurse who hurt Mommy. The medications that made Christine sleep too much. The constant crying. There was something deeply wrong with this story, and she was beginning to suspect that Jack and James knew much more than the adults realized. Around 2 in the morning, she was awakened by a sound that was becoming familiar, muffled crying coming from the twins' room. Without hesitation, she quietly went down to the 2nd floor and found the door ajar. Jack was having a nightmare, tossing in bed while James tried to wake him. Jack, wake up. You're dreaming about the bad nurse again. Sarah slowly entered the room. James, can I help? The boy looked at her with tear-filled eyes. He always dreams that the nurse is trying to take Mommy away again. And this time she takes us with her, Jack said, finally waking up, still trembling with fear. Sarah knelt beside the bed, keeping her distance but offering her presence. Do you want to tell me about this dream? The two looked at each other, and James nodded slowly. In the dream, the nurse wears that white coat and has a big syringe. She says she's going to give us medicine to make us quiet, just like she did with Mommy. But we run away, Jack added. Only sometimes in the dream our legs don't work right. Sarah felt her heart break. These children carried traumas far deeper than a simple separation from their parents. There was something sinister behind Christine's hospitalization, and the twins had witnessed something that had profoundly marked them. You are safe here, she whispered. I will make sure no one hurts you. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Jack reached out his small hand and lightly touched Sarah's arm. Do you promise you won't let the bad nurse come back? I promise, she replied, knowing she was committing to something much bigger than just caring for 2 children. She was promising to unearth secrets that someone had buried very well and to protect Jack and James from anything that might try to hurt them again. The summer festival at the private school Jack and James attended took place on the last Saturday of June, and Sarah had volunteered to prepare traditional treats for the occasion. Mr. Johnson initially hesitated. It wasn't common for the nanny to participate in family social events, but Sarah's gentle insistence and the unprecedented enthusiasm. On Friday night, Sarah went down to the kitchen of the mansion carrying a bag of ingredients she had bought with her own money at the Central Market in Los Angeles. Victoria watched curiously as she spread out on the marble countertop. Yellow cornmeal, fresh grated coconut, brown sugar, artisanal condensed milk, and farm-fresh eggs that still had feathers stuck to the shells. What kind of sweets are you going to make? Victoria asked, genuinely interested. Recipes my maternal grandmother taught me when I was little, Sarah explained, tying on the apron she had brought from home, a faded floral fabric that contrasted with the sophistication of the kitchen equipped with imported appliances. She lived in a small town in Texas, and for every summer festival in the community, she would prepare the sweets. Sarah started by making the cornmeal cake batter, mixing the dry ingredients while telling stories from her childhood to Victoria. My grandma used to say that the secret to cornmeal cake was the love with which you mix the batter. You had to make circular motions, always in the same direction, thinking of good things. And did it work? Victoria asked, smiling for the first time since Sarah had arrived at the house. Always. Grandma Alzira's cakes were the first to disappear at any party. While the cake was baking, Sarah began to prepare the rice pudding, sautéing the rice in milk with a cinnamon stick and clove. The sweet and comforting aroma filled the kitchen, rising up the stairs and spreading through the hallways of the mansion like an invisible hug. Jack and James, who should have been asleep for an hour, appeared barefoot in the kitchen doorway, wearing cotton pajamas with dinosaur prints. Their hair was messy from sleep, but their eyes sparkled with curiosity. "What a nice smell," Jack said, shyly approaching the counter. "It's rice pudding," Sarah explained, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. "Do you want to help make the melted brown sugar?" The boys looked at each other. Until then, they had never been invited to participate in any kitchen activity. Mrs. Johnson had always considered the kitchen the exclusive territory of the staff, and Edward, though loving, had never thought to involve his children in domestic activities. "Can we really?" James asked, still suspicious. "Of course. But first, let's wash our little hands." Sarah helped the twins climb onto the high stools to reach the sink. As they soaked their small hands, she noticed how they moved in sync. When Jack extended his right hand under the faucet, James did the same movement, as if they were reflections of each other. "Now you're going to help me break the brown sugar into pieces," she instructed, placing the dark bar on a wooden board. "We use this small hammer, but be careful not to hurt your little fingers." Jack held the hammer with the seriousness of a surgeon, giving precise little taps on the brown sugar. James held the larger pieces so his brother could break them better. It was the first time Sarah saw them working together on something productive, instead of just comforting each other. "My grandma used to say that brown sugar is the sweet of the poor who became rich," Sarah said, while melting the pieces in a small pot. In the past, only those who worked in the sugarcane fields knew this flavor. Nowadays, it's considered gourmet. "What's gourmet?" James asked, licking a little finger that he had discreetly dipped into the melted brown sugar. "It's when a simple food becomes so good that it becomes special," Sarah explained, smiling as she saw that Jack had also secretly tasted the brown sugar. Edward appeared in the kitchen doorway at that moment, drawn by the laughter echoing through the ground floor. He hadn't heard his children laugh with such spontaneity in months. He stopped in the doorway, observing the scene. Sarah in the floral apron, the boys with sticky mouths from the brown sugar, Victoria smiling as she washed the used dishes. "Dad," Jack called excitedly, "we're making sweets for the school party." "I see that," Edward said, moving closer to the counter. "And by the smell, you're doing a great job. Do you want to try?" James offered, extending a little spoon with rice pudding. Edward hesitated for a moment. Since Christine had left, he had kept his distance from the daily activities of his children, as if fearing to get too involved in a routine that could be broken again. But the twins' expectant gaze moved him. "Sure," he said, tasting the sweet. The flavor immediately transported him back to his childhood. Weekends at his paternal grandfather's farm, family gatherings where the women gathered in the kitchen preparing traditional treats while the children played in the yards. "It's delicious," he said sincerely. "I haven't had homemade rice pudding in years." Sarah said the secret is in the love. Jack explained seriously. "You have to stir while thinking of good things." Edward looked at Sarah, who blushed slightly under his gaze. There was something in her presence that brought a sense of familiar normalcy that had long been lost in that house. "What good things did you think of?" he asked the twins. "I thought about us playing in the garden," James replied. "And I thought about when Sarah reads stories to us," Jack added. It was then that Mrs. Johnson appeared in the kitchen doorway, still dressed in the silk robe she wore to sleep. Her expression was one of barely concealed disapproval. "Edward, what's happening here?" "The children should have been asleep a long time ago. We're making sweets for the school party, Grandma," James explained excitedly, before their father could respond. "In my kitchen?" Mrs. Johnson asked, as if the idea were absurd. "Victoria, why did you allow this?" The housekeeper shrank back. "Mrs. Johnson, they were having fun. And Sarah? Sarah is here to take care of the children, not to give cooking lessons in the middle of the night. The matriarch cut in sharply. And you too, she addressed the twins. Go upstairs to your room immediately. The warm atmosphere disintegrated instantly. Jack and James lowered their heads, all the joy draining from their small faces. Mom, Edward said. They intervened. They're just having fun. There's nothing wrong with. Edward, we need to talk. Now. Mrs. Johnson left the kitchen, clearly expecting her son to follow her. Edward looked at the twins, then at Sarah. Sarah, can you take the boys to the room? I need to sort this out. After everyone left, Victoria and Sarah were left alone in the kitchen, finishing cleaning the dishes in silence. The sweet aroma of traditional treats still lingered in the air, but the magic of the moment had shattered. Mrs. Johnson doesn't like it when things go off routine, Victoria explained quietly. She's afraid the boys will get too attached and then suffer if you leave. But forming healthy emotional bonds is crucial for their development, Sarah protested. They need to learn to trust people again. I know that, and you know that. But Mrs. Johnson, she has her own ways of protecting the family. That night, Sarah had trouble sleeping. From her bedroom window, she could see the lights on in the study downstairs, where Edward was probably being reprimanded by his mother. She knew she had crossed an invisible line by involving the children in such a domestic and intimate activity, but seeing Jack and James smile and laugh while doing something productive together had been worth every second. The next day, during the summer festival at school, Sarah's treats were an absolute hit. Jack and James proudly told everyone they had helped make them, and for the first time since they had been studying there, the children seemed truly integrated into the social environment. But Sarah noticed that Mrs. Johnson was watching her with increasingly suspicious eyes, as if every smile drawn from the twins was a threat to the established order of the house. The silent war for the children's hearts had begun, and Sarah knew she would need to be very careful not to lose the battle before fully understanding what the rules of the game were. Christine Smith was scrolling through the school's Instagram photos of her children for the 10th time that morning, zooming in on each image in an attempt to catch a glimpse of Jack and James among the other kids at the summer festival. Sitting in the small rented apartment in the Trindade neighborhood, near the Federal University, she held her phone with slightly trembling hands, a side effect of the medication she was still taking to manage her anxiety. At 32, Christine maintained the natural beauty that had won Edward over years before, but her green eyes now carried a deep sadness that even makeup couldn't completely conceal. She worked as a freelance medical translator, a job that allowed her to stay home and avoid crowds, places that still made her extremely nervous. When she finally found a photo where she could identify the twins, her heart shattered and filled with joy at the same time. Jack and James were smiling, a genuine smile she hadn't seen in over 2 years. They were holding plates with treats and looked relaxed, at ease, happy. Who managed this? She murmured to herself, zooming in on the image. Who managed to make them smile like that? In the comments of the school's post, she found the answer. Congratulations to students Jack and James Johnson for the delicious treats. Their nanny is a kitchen artist. Hashtag Summer Festival, hashtag New Life School. Christine felt a pang of something between jealousy and gratitude. Another woman was giving her children something she hadn't been able to provide in the last few months before leaving. Spontaneous joy, relaxation, normalcy. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart, even though she had promised herself she wouldn't call so soon. Dr. Patricia? It's Christine. I know we don't have an appointment scheduled, but I needed to talk to someone. Dr. Patricia Smith had been the psychiatrist who supported Christine during the worst moments of her late postpartum depression, and one of the few people who knew the true version of the events that led to her departure from the Johnson mansion. Christine, it's good to hear your voice. How are you? Confused, Christine admitted, still looking at the photos on her phone. I saw pictures of the boys today. They were happy, really happy, and that makes me relieved, but at the same time, it makes you question your decision to keep your distance. Exactly. Dr. Patricia, did I do the right thing? Was leaving them with Edward and stepping back really the best for them? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Patricia knew this was a question Christine had been carrying like an immense weight for 2 years. Christine, do you remember the state you were in when you first came to my office? You could barely get out of bed. You had panic attacks when the boys cried. You were taking too much medication because someone convinced you that you needed it to be a good mother. I remember, Christine whispered. But I also remember that I loved my children. Even in the worst moments, I loved them desperately. And it was that love that gave you the strength to make the hardest decision of your life. You left to get treatment, to heal, so you could return to being the mother they deserved. Christine got up and walked to the window of her apartment, looking at the street's activity. College students hurried by, carrying books and backpacks, living their lives without the weight of decisions that could destroy or save an entire family. But they were happy without me, doctor. Look at these photos. They are radiant. Maybe I was the problem all along. Or maybe you were a victim of a situation much more complex than you could understand at the time. Dr. Patricia replied firmly. Christine, you told me things during our sessions that suggest your depression was artificially exacerbated. The excessive medication, the forced isolation, the constant pressure to accept that you were an inadequate mother. Do you think Mrs. Johnson really did all that on purpose? I think some people are capable of anything. Christine closed her eyes, remembering the last few months in the mansion. The medical appointments that Mrs. Johnson scheduled without consulting her, the medications arriving in increasingly larger doses, the subtle comments about how she was failing as a mother when Jack and James cried or threw tantrums. I was a good mom before, she said, more to herself than to the psychiatrist. In the first 2 years, I was a good mom. You were an excellent mother. The boys were glued to you, remember? It was only after the interventions from Edward's family started that you began to doubt yourself. What if I go back? What if I fight for custody? That's a decision only you can make. But if you decide to fight, you need to be prepared to face a very powerful family with many resources. And you need to be sure that you are emotionally strong enough to protect the boys from any retaliation. After hanging up, Christine sat on the small sofa in the apartment, looking at the few photos she had brought from the mansion when she left. Jack and James as babies, Edward genuinely smiling, moments of happiness that seemed to have happened in another life. She opened her laptop and began typing an email she had mentally drafted hundreds of times. Edward, I know I don't have the right to reach out after so long, but I saw the photos from the summer festival, and the boys look well. Happy. I wanted to thank you and the new nanny for taking such good care of them. I didn't disappear because I didn't love them. I left because I loved them too much to allow them to keep seeing their mother deteriorate day after day. I needed to heal to be the mother they deserved. I'm better now. Much better. And every day I think about coming back, about fighting for the right to be part of their lives again. But I'm afraid that my return might confuse or hurt them in some way. Could you honestly tell me, do they ask about me? Do they miss me? Or have they gotten used to life without their mom? If you think my presence could be good for them, I would like to discuss the possibility of gradual visits. If you think it's better for me to stay away, I will respect your decision. I just want what's best for Jack and James. With love and longing, Christine. She reread the email 5 times before she had the courage to hit send. Then, she sat in front of the computer, imagining Edward reading her words in the office or in the library of the mansion, deciding the fate of a family that had shattered 2 years earlier. That same afternoon, while Sarah played with the twins in the mansion's garden, Edward received the email on his phone. His hands trembled upon seeing Christine's name in the inbox. It was the first time she had reached out since she left. He read the message 3 times, each word awakening a mix of emotions he had tried to bury: residual love, bitterness, confusion, and a longing he wouldn't admit even to himself. From the high window of the library, Mrs. Johnson watched Edward in the garden, noticing how he held the phone with a tense expression. Her sharp matriarch instincts immediately sensed that something had changed, that a new threat was approaching her carefully constructed control over the family. And in the garden, while pushing Jack on the swing and watching James build castles in the sandbox, Sarah had no idea that an emotional storm was brewing around her. A storm that would test not only her ability to care for the children, but her strength to navigate the treacherous waters of a family full of secrets and unhealed pain. Dr. Gabriel Smith adjusted his reading glasses as he examined the records of the Johnson twins in his office in downtown Los Angeles. A pediatric neurologist for 20 years, he had developed a keen clinical eye to identify not only medical issues, but also signs of emotional trauma in children. His office was intentionally welcoming, walls painted in soft tones, educational toys strategically scattered, and an aquarium with colorful fish that always captured the attention of the little patients. "So, Jack and James," he said, addressing the twins who were sitting side by side in the special children's chair. "You came here for some very simple tests. Nothing that will hurt, I promise." Sarah was sitting in a nearby chair, observing how the boys reacted to the medical environment. Since they had entered the office, James had clung to his brother's arm, and Jack kept his eyes fixed on the door, as if calculating an escape route. Edward had scheduled the appointment after Sarah had discreetly suggested that some of the twins' behaviors, extreme sensitivity to noises, difficulty with textures, and fear of anything related to hospitals, might have medical explanations beyond emotional trauma. "Dr. Gabriel," Sarah gently interjected, "may I mention some observations I've made?" "Of course. In fact, it's very helpful to have the account of someone who lives with them daily. James has a very high sensitivity to textures. He can't wear certain clothes, avoids foods with specific consistencies, and is very uncomfortable with unexpected touches. Jack is more sensitive to sounds, sirens, vacuum cleaners. Even the blender makes him very agitated." Dr. Gabriel nodded, taking notes. "And have you noticed if this has always been the case, or if it developed after a specific event?" The twins looked at each other, and Jack whispered something in his brother's ear before answering. "After Mommy went to the hospital. Before that, we liked it when she brushed our hair and sang." "And in the hospital, did you feel uncomfortable with anything specific?" Dr. Gabriel asked, slowly approaching the chair where they were sitting. "The noises," James replied softly. "Always. There was noise from machines, and people were talking very loudly. And it smelled very strong. The nurses wore gloves that made noise when they moved," Jack added. "And there was one who always wanted to touch us, but her hands were very cold." Dr. Gabriel exchanged a meaningful glance with Sarah. Traumatic experiences in a hospital environment could certainly exacerbate pre-existing sensory sensitivities. "All right, boys. Now we're going to do some really cool tests. It's like a game, okay?" The next 40 minutes were a series of carefully planned activities. Dr. Gabriel tested the twins' reactions to different textures, smooth fabrics, rough ones, coarse materials, sounds of various frequencies and intensities, and even different scents. He also observed how they processed instructions, if they could filter out background noise, and how they reacted to visual stimuli. "James, can you tell me how you feel when I touch your arm with this fabric?" he asked, holding a piece of velvet. "I don't like it. It tickles badly," James replied, pulling back his arm. "And this one?" Dr. Gabriel showed a piece of smooth cotton fabric. "This one is nice, just like the blanket that Sarah brought for us." Sarah was surprised. She had given the boys cotton blankets that her mother used when she was in the hospital, soft fabrics that carried a familiar scent of home. With Jack, the auditory test revealed something even more specific. "Jack, I'm going to play some sounds. Tell me which one bothers you the most." When Dr. Gabriel played the sound of an ambulance siren, Jack literally jumped out of his chair and ran behind Sarah, covering his ears with his hands. "That sound is really bad," he said, trembling. "It's the sound of when they took Mommy away." After an hour of examinations, Dr. Gabriel spoke with Edward and Sarah privately while the twins played with puzzles at a small table in the office. "Edward, I need to be direct with you. James shows clear signs of sensory processing disorder, specifically tactile hypersensitivity. It's a neurological condition that affects how the nervous system receives and responds to sensory information." Edward frowned. "Is it serious?" "It's not serious in the sense of being dangerous, but it explains a lot about his behavior. He literally feels the world more intensely than other children. Textures that are neutral for us can be uncomfortable or even painful for him." "And what about Jack?" Sarah asked. "Jack has auditory hypersensitivity associated with specific trauma. The combination of the neurological condition with traumatic hospital memories has created a very strong aversion to certain sounds." "Is there treatment?" Edward wanted to know. "Yes, and the good news is that you are already doing a lot of things right without knowing it." Dr. Gabriel smiled at Sarah. "Occupational therapy will help a lot, but the environmental adaptations you have already started, soft fabrics, quiet environments, respecting the children's sensory limits, are essential." "Dr. Gabriel," Sarah said hesitantly, "does this mean they have always been this way, even before the trauma with their mother?" "Probably yes. Sensory processing disorder is neurological, meaning they were born with this tendency. But the hospital trauma turned a neurological characteristic into a source of extreme anxiety. Edward sat heavily in a chair. Why didn't anyone identify this before? Unfortunately, it's common for these conditions to be misdiagnosed as tantrums, spoiling, or behavioral problems. Especially when there is emotional trauma involved, professionals sometimes focus only on the psychological aspect. So when they screamed or hid from the other nannies, Edward began. They weren't being difficult. They were genuinely overwhelmed sensory-wise. A nanny who didn't understand this could inadvertently torture these children just by trying to care for them normally. Sarah felt a tightness in her heart remembering reports about previous nannies who forced physical contact or ignored the boys' specific fears. Dr. Gabriel, can I ask about their mother? Edward told me she had late postpartum depression. Could she also have had difficulties understanding the sensory needs of the twins? The doctor chose his words carefully. It's possible. Mothers of children with special sensory needs sometimes feel inadequate when they can't comfort their children in the traditional way. It can generate feelings of rejection, incompetence, especially if no one explained to her that the problem wasn't with her motherhood, but rather a neurological issue with the children, Sarah completed. Edward was silent for a few moments, processing the information. Doctor, does this mean that part of Christine's problems, part of her depression, could have been caused by not understanding what was happening with the boys? It's a possibility worth considering, Edward. Mothers who feel constantly rejected by their own children, without understanding why, can develop severe depressive episodes. When they returned to where the twins were playing, Dr. Gabriel knelt down to their level. Jack, James, do you know that you are very special? You have a superpower. What kind of superpower? Jack asked, intrigued. You feel the world in a very special way. James, you can detect textures that other people don't even notice. Jack, you hear sounds that other people don't pay attention to. That makes you unique. But sometimes it hurts, James said sincerely. I know, and we will teach you tricks so that it doesn't hurt anymore. And we will teach your dad and Sarah how to help you when you're feeling overwhelmed. On the way home, Edward drove in silence while Sarah watched the twins in the back seat, finally understanding why they had connected with her so quickly. Unconsciously, she had always respected their sensory needs, gentle movements, soft voices, permission to maintain physical distance. Sarah, Edward finally said, thank you for insisting on this appointment. 2 years. 2 years they suffered without anyone really understanding what was going on. Now we understand, she replied softly, and we will do everything right from now on. But as she spoke, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Christine, a young mother, trying to care for twins with special needs that no one had identified, being medicated in excess by a family that perhaps preferred to believe that the problem lay within themselves rather than seeking true answers. Did Christine know that her children had specific sensory needs? Had anyone explained to her that the cries and the apparent rejection were not personal, but neurological? And more importantly, wasn't it time for someone to tell Christine the truth about what was really happening with her children? The study in the Johnson mansion had become Eduardo's nightly refuge. Every night, after Jack and James fell asleep, he locked himself among the mahogany shelves and leather-bound volumes, with a glass of 15-year-old Scotch whiskey and the company's financial reports spread out on the rosewood table that had belonged to his great-grandfather. It was there, surrounded by the weight of family tradition, that he tried to process the changes that Sarah had brought into his life. On that August night, Eduardo was rereading for the third time the email that Christine had sent a week earlier. Each word felt like a stab to poorly healed wounds, wounds he had tried to heal with excessive work and emotional distance from his children. I didn't disappear because I didn't love them, he murmured, repeating a phrase that haunted him. I left because I loved them too much. The sound of the study door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah stood in the doorway, wearing a simple cotton robe over her pajamas, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. Sorry to disturb you, Eduardo. I heard Jack crying and came to check. He had another nightmare, but I managed to calm him down. Just wanted to let you know. Eduardo noticed that she had stopped calling him Mr. Johnson during more intimate conversations, and strangely, this pleased him. Come in, please. Would you accept a drink? Sarah hesitated. I shouldn't. Sarah, you've been in this house for 4 months. You're already part of the family. Have a seat. She entered and settled into the leather armchair near the extinguished fireplace. Eduardo poured her a small glass of whiskey and refilled his own. How was he? Jack, confused. He dreamed that his mom came back, but that she couldn't see him because he was different. I think he's processing the information from the appointment with Dr. Henry. Eduardo sighed deeply. Sarah, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. What would you do if you were me? If you were the father of two traumatized children and their mother reappeared after 2 years wanting to be part of their lives again? Sarah took a small sip of the whiskey, feeling the liquid gently burn her throat. Can I ask a question before I answer? Go ahead. Why did Christine really leave? I know you told me she had depression, but there's something more, isn't there? Eduardo stood up and walked to the window overlooking the moonlit garden. At 42, he carried the weight of decisions he had made to protect the family, but which perhaps had cost more than he had imagined. Christine is an extraordinary woman, he began, keeping his eyes fixed on the garden. She had a degree in literature, spoke 3 languages, and had an artistic sensitivity that captivated me. When we met, I fell in love not only with her beauty but with the way she saw the world. And what changed? The twins were born, and in the first months, everything seemed perfect. Christine was a devoted mother. The boys were calm babies. But when they turned 1, they began to exhibit behaviors that neither of us understood. Eduardo returned to his chair, swirling the whiskey glass between his hands. Jack cried every time Christine tried to brush his hair. James rejected certain clothes, certain foods. They seemed uncomfortable with her touch, with lullabies, with the normal routines of motherhood. That must have been devastating for her, Sarah murmured. It was. She began to believe she was a terrible mother, that the children rejected her for some flaw of hers. I tried to console her, but I admit I didn't understand what was happening either. And your mother? Eduardo paused long before responding. My mother has always been a woman of strong opinions. She watched Christine struggle with the boys and, well, she had her theories. What kind of theories? That Christine was too young, too inexperienced. That she needed medical help to cope with motherhood. My mother knew a private psychiatrist, Dr. Henry Smith, who had a clinic here in Los Angeles. Sarah felt a shiver of apprehension. And you took Christine to this doctor? We did. And he diagnosed her with severe postpartum depression with tendencies of maternal rejection. He prescribed medication, heavy medication. What kind of medication? Antidepressants, anxiolytics, even sedatives for when she got too agitated trying to calm the boys and couldn't. Eduardo stood up again, this time walking to the shelf where he kept family photo albums. He pulled out a volume and opened it to a specific page. Christine holding the newborn twins, smiling radiantly. This is the Christine I married, he said, showing the photo to Sarah. And this, he turned a few pages, is Christine 6 months after treatment. The difference was shocking. In the second photo, Christine looked like a faded version of herself, glazed eyes, forced smile, holding the boys as if they were fragile objects she feared to break. Eduardo, Sarah said carefully, after getting to know Jack and James, after understanding their sensory needs, don't you think the problem may have never been with Christine's motherhood? I think about that every day since the appointment with Dr. Henry, he admitted, his voice slightly breaking. What if Christine was right from the beginning? What if she instinctively knew there was something different about the boys, but no one took her seriously? And instead, you medicated her to make her stop complaining. Eduardo slammed the album shut. Sarah, I want you to understand, I did what I thought was best at the time. My mother had experience raising children, the doctor was respected, and Christine was really suffering. But did the medication help her or make it worse? At first, it seemed to help. She became calmer, less anxious. But she also became distant, as if she were watching her own life from afar. Sarah took another sip of whiskey, organizing her thoughts. Edward, can I see the letter she left when she left? He hesitated, then went to a locked drawer in the desk. He pulled out a yellowed envelope and handed it to Sarah. The letter was written in shaky handwriting. Edward, I can no longer live pretending to be the mother our children deserve. Every time I try to touch them, they pull away. Every time I try to comfort them, they cry more. The medications make me feel like I'm floating, but they don't cure the fact that I am inadequate to be a mother. You are a wonderful father, and they need you. Their mother knows better than I do how to take care of them. I am leaving because I love them too much to continue being the source of their unhappiness. Please, do not look for me. When I am better, when I can become the mother they deserve, maybe I will return. But that may take a long time. Take care of them for me. With eternal love, Christine. Sarah finished reading with tears in her eyes. Edward, this is not the letter of a mother who abandoned her children. It is the letter of a mother who believed she was saving her children from herself. I know, he whispered. I always knew. And now she wants to come back. After 2 years of treatment, healing, trying to become the mother she thought they needed. Edward returned to his chair, looking suddenly older than his 42 years. Sarah, I am scared. Scared that Jack and James won't accept her anymore. Scared that she will confuse them. Scared that my mother will do something to prevent her return. And scared of what else? He looked her in the eyes, and Sarah saw a vulnerability there that he rarely showed. Scared that I am still in love with her. Scared that these 2 years have been the biggest mistake of my life. They sat in silence for a few minutes, only the sound of the old clock marking the seconds. Finally, Sarah stood up. Edward, can I make a suggestion? Please. Reply to her email. Tell her about the boy's diagnosis. Tell her how they are improving now that we understand their needs. And invite her to talk. And if my mother, your mother doesn't need to know yet. This is between you, Christine, and the children. Edward nodded slowly. Sarah, thank you. For everything. For taking care of my children, for helping me understand them, for helping me understand myself. As Sarah left the study, Edward was left alone with his thoughts, Christine's email still open on the computer. For the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to imagine a possibility he had buried, that his family could be rebuilt, and that true love could overcome even the most painful mistakes of the past. But upstairs, behind the curtain of the window in her room, Mrs. Johnson had observed the entire conversation in the study through the reflection in the garden window. And for the first time in a long time, the matriarch of the Johnson family felt that she was losing control of the situation she had orchestrated so carefully 2 years earlier. Detective Mark Roberts drove his silver Civic through the narrow streets of the Maplewood neighborhood, following the address that Mrs. Johnson had provided 3 weeks earlier. At 50 years old, a retired civil police officer, Mark had built a solid career as a private investigator, specializing in cases involving high-profile families. He knew that discretion and efficiency were crucial when working for the California elite. He parked in front of a simple brick house, painted a faded blue, with a small garden in the front yard where tomatoes and herbs grew. It was a stark contrast to the Johnson mansion in Beverly Hills. He checked his notes in his leather notebook once more. Mrs. Johnson, 56 years old, mother of nanny Sarah Johnson. Hospitalized at the regional hospital with pneumonia in March, prolonged treatment. Mark got out of the car and observed the street's activity. Children playing on the sidewalk, women hanging clothes on the line, men returning from work on bicycles. It was a working-class neighborhood, honest, where everyone knew everyone. He knocked on the door of the Johnsons' house and was greeted by a thin woman of about 60, with gray hair tied in a simple bun, wearing a floral apron over a house dress. Mrs. Johnson? That's me. How can I help you? My name is Mark Roberts. I'm a freelance journalist. He lied with the ease of someone who had perfected the technique over the years. I'm writing an article about families who have overcome financial difficulties through education. I heard that your daughter Sarah graduated in education and landed a very good job. Mrs. Johnson smiled with genuine pride. Oh, my Sarah. Come in, come in. Would you like some coffee? The living room of the house was small but impeccably clean, decorated with simple furniture and family photographs scattered across the walls. Mark immediately noticed a framed diploma hanging in a prominent place. Sarah Johnson, bachelor's in education, State University of California, graduated with honors. Mrs. Johnson, you must be very proud of Sarah. Very proud indeed, she replied, serving coffee in floral porcelain cups. My daughter has always been studious, you know, since she was little. Her father, poor thing, died when she was 19, and she could have given up on her studies. But no, she said, Mom, I will graduate to give us a better life. And how did she manage to pay for university? Full scholarship, my son. Scholarship program. And she also worked. Mark took notes, pretending to have journalistic interest. And now she works for a family from Beverly Hills, right? Yes, she does. A very good, very wealthy family. She takes care of two beautiful twins. She sends me pictures every week. Mrs. Johnson took out her phone and showed the photos that Mariana sent. Jack and James playing in the yard, doing activities, smiling. It was obvious the genuine affection that existed between the nanny and the children. Mrs. Johnson, may I ask about the time you were hospitalized? It must have been very difficult for both of you. The woman's face darkened slightly. It was indeed a very difficult time. Pneumonia that got complicated. I was hospitalized for 3 months. The doctors thought I wouldn't make it. And how did you manage to pay for the treatment? Oh, that was a blessing. Mr. Johnson, Mariana's employer, he paid for everything. Private care at the best hospital in the city. I told Mariana, honey, how are we going to pay for this? And she said, Mom, don't worry, Mr. Johnson is a very good person. Mark raised his eyebrows. This was a detail that was not in his initial information. Her employer paid for your medical treatment? Yes, he did. Without knowing me, without seeing me. Just because Mariana asked for help. Good people like that are hard to find these days. And did Mariana always want to work as a nanny? She always loved children, since she was little. She took care of the neighbors' kids, helped at the church daycare. But you know, Mrs. Johnson lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. I think she has something special about her for dealing with traumatized children. What do you mean? Her brother, Brian, when their father died, he was very shaken. He was just a 12-year-old boy, right? He started having nightmares, didn't want to leave the house, was afraid of everything. It was Mariana who took care of him, who had patience, who helped him overcome the trauma. And where is Brian now? Oh, what a pride. He is at State University, studying engineering. On a scholarship too, just like his sister. Mark continued talking with Mrs. Johnson for another hour, gathering information about the Johnson family. He discovered they were simple, hard-working people, with no history of legal issues or suspicious behavior. The father had been a construction worker, died in a work accident that was not the company's fault, a scaffolding fall caused by his own mistake. The mother had always worked as a house cleaner, raising her children with honesty and dedication. Mrs. Johnson, one last question. Do you know anything about the family that Mariana works for? Have you heard of the Johnsons? I know they are important people, right? Owners of a big company. But Mariana doesn't talk much about them, only about the children. She says the boys suffered a lot from their parents' separation, and that she is helping them feel better again. Mark said goodbye to Mrs. Johnson and drove to a coffee shop in the city center, where he met Ricardo Smith, an investigative journalist he had known for years. Ricardo, I need information about a family here in Los Angeles. The Johnsons, owners of Johnson Lumber. Edward Johnson? I know him by name. A traditional company, a lumber family for 3 generations. What's the interest? I'm doing private investigative work. Nothing illegal, just background checks on employees. Ricardo fiddled with his laptop and opened some files. Edward is clean, as far as I know. A respected businessman, never involved in scandals. But his mother, Helena Johnson. What about her? A very powerful woman behind the scenes of local politics. She makes significant donations to political campaigns, has influence in the judiciary. The kind of person who resolves problems before they become public. What kind of problems? About 3 years ago, there was a rumor about a scandal involving his daughter-in-law, Christine. Something about involuntary psychiatric hospitalization, but it was never confirmed. The issue disappeared from the media very quickly. Mark noted this information with special interest. And do you know where Christine is now? She disappeared. Simply vanished from social life. Some say she left the city, others that she had a nervous breakdown. But no one talks openly about it. That night, Mark compiled his report for Mrs. Johnson but decided to omit some strategic information. The official report only mentioned that Mariana Johnson came from a humble but honest family, with no criminal background, solid higher education, and impeccable recommendations. What he did not include was the most intriguing discovery of the day. When he checked the records from the regional hospital, he found that Mrs. Johnson's treatment had cost over $50,000, a sum that Edward Johnson paid in full, without question, for the treatment of a nanny who had worked for him for only 2 weeks at the time. This was not normal behavior for an employer, no matter how generous he was. It was the behavior of someone who was desperately grateful for the help Mariana was offering to his children. Mark also discovered another interesting fact. Mariana had sent her resume to dozens of families before landing the job with the Johnsons. But one of the families that rejected her commented that she seemed too young and inexperienced to handle troubled children. The fact that Edward hired an inexperienced nanny when he had the resources to hire the best professional available suggested that there was something more to the decision. Perhaps desperation, perhaps intuition, or maybe Mariana had some special quality that the other candidates did not possess. As he drove back home, Mark reflected on the case. There was an emotional complexity in that family that went far beyond a simple background check. There were buried secrets, hurt people, and a young nanny who, unknowingly, had become a central piece in a game much more dangerous than she realized. He decided to keep discreet surveillance on the situation. His investigator's instinct. The story was far from over, and Sarah Johnson might need protection before everything was resolved. The new year of 2026 arrived with a torrential rain that transformed the gardens of the Johnson mansion into a spectacle of dancing leaves and crystal-clear puddles. Sarah watched the storm from the twins' room while Jack and James slept soundly, for the first time in months, each in their own bed, without nightmares or nighttime fears that forced them to hug each other for safety. It had been a year of transformations that no one could have predicted when she first stepped into that house in March. The boys were now attending occupational therapy twice a week with a therapist specializing in sensory processing, had routines adapted to their neurological needs, and, more importantly, had learned that their differences were superpowers, not defects. The sound of footsteps in the hallway alerted her to someone's presence. Edward appeared at the door, wearing a wool sweater and jeans, a more relaxed version of the formal businessman she had known. In recent months, he had allowed himself to just be a father, leaving part of the management of the company to trusted administrators. "How are they?" he asked in a whisper. "Sleeping like angels." James even left Daisy on the shelf instead of sleeping with her. Edward smiled. It was a genuine smile, full of a peace that Sarah hadn't seen on her first day of work. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about some changes that are coming." They left the room and went downstairs to the kitchen, where Victoria had left fresh coffee and homemade powdered sugar bread. The mansion was quiet. Mrs. Johnson had traveled to visit a sister in Porto Alegre, an absence that created a lighter atmosphere throughout the house. "Edward, you seem nervous," Sarah observed, pouring coffee for both of them. "Christine is coming back tomorrow." The words hung in the air like a confession of something inevitable that they both knew would happen. After months of cautious emails, supervised video calls, and a reconnaissance visit 3 weeks earlier, Edward and Christine had decided it was time to bring the family together. "How do you feel about that?" Sarah asked, although she could see the answer in his eyes. "Scared, hopeful, guilty." Edward stirred his coffee more times than necessary. "Sarah, these 10 months with you have been revealing. You haven't just taken care of my children. You've taught me to be a father again, showed me that love isn't enough if we don't understand the real needs of the people we love." Sarah felt her heart tighten. She knew that this conversation would eventually come. "And what is my role when she returns?" "That's the conversation we need to have. Christine wants you to stay here. She said it would be selfish to deprive Jack and James of someone who understands them so well. And you? What do you want?" Edward stopped stirring his coffee and looked directly at her. "I want you to be happy. And I know you won't be completely happy just being a nanny for the rest of your life." Sarah frowned. "Edward, I love these boys as if they were my own." "I know, and that's exactly why I have a proposal for you." He stood up and returned with a folder of documents. "Remember when you mentioned that you always wanted to open a school for children with special needs?" "Edward, that was just a dream." "It doesn't have to be just a dream." He opened the folder, revealing architectural plans, feasibility studies, and legal documents. "I'm offering you a partnership in an educational project. A school that combines traditional pedagogy with specialized therapies. A place where children like Jack and James can learn while respecting their differences." Sarah looked at the documents with wide eyes. "Edward, this must cost a fortune, and it will generate profit too. There is pent-up demand for this type of education in Los Angeles. But more than that, it would be a legacy, a way to turn our experience into something that can help hundreds of families. And Jack and James, they would be our first students. And you would be the educational director. Christine, who has a degree in languages and speaks several languages, could coordinate the language program. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. You thought of everything, didn't you? I thought about what would be best for everyone. For the boys, for you, for Christine, and for me. And your mother? Edward sighed. My mother will have to accept it. Or at least, she will have to choose between accepting it or losing contact with her grandchildren. At that moment, the sound of small bare feet on the stairs announced the arrival of Jack and James. They appeared in the kitchen in pajamas, hair messy, James carrying the doll Daisy. Why are you awake talking? Jack asked, climbing onto a chair. We're talking about Mommy's return, Edward explained, pulling his son onto his lap. And about the new school we're going to build, Sarah added, doing the same with James. A school just for us? James asked, intrigued. A school for you and for other special children like you, Edward clarified. And will Sarah be our teacher? Jack wanted to know. If she accepts, yes. The twins looked at each other with that telepathic communication they had developed, then smiled simultaneously. We accept, James said solemnly. You accept? Sarah laughed. Aren't I the one who has to accept? You're already part of the family, Jack declared with the seriousness of someone establishing an undeniable fact. You just need to sign the papers. Edward and Sarah looked at each other over the heads of the children, and at that moment, both knew they were about to embark on an adventure that would change not only their lives, but the lives of many families still struggling to understand and accept their children's differences. So it's decided, Sarah said, extending her hand to Edward. Partnership accepted. When they shook hands, Jack and James applauded as if they were watching the end of a movie, and for the first time since. Upon arriving at that house, Sarah Johnson knew she had found not just a job, but a purpose that would forever unite two families that complemented each other perfectly. 3 months later, the Together We Grow School opened its doors in a beautifully renovated property in the Maplewood neighborhood. Jack and James were the first students to cross the vibrant painted gate, followed by 20 other children with special needs whose parents had finally found a place where their children would be understood, accepted, and loved just as they were. And on the morning of the inauguration, when Sarah saw Christine arriving hand in hand with Edward, proudly watching the children playing freely in the schoolyard, she knew that sometimes happy endings do not come as we expect. They come as something even better, as new beginnings filled with infinite possibilities. Please like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment, I watched until here, and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's going to be very exciting.